This is my reaction to Wretched's recent video on leaving children in daycare and the effect that daycare has on children and on moms. I just want to add my input to that video. By the way, if you haven't watched it, it's a good video, and it references some studies that have been done on how daycare affects children.
CHABAD.org. They happen to have compiled a lot of the studies that have been done on the issue of daycare. There's perceived abandonment. This is a study conducted by Henry Branchen. Reports that full-time daycare for infants and toddlers is stressful because your baby will perceive you're leaving her at daycare as maternal abandonment. Furthermore, having to interact with multiple caregivers contributes to the stress, as your baby will not develop a relationship with someone she can necessarily count on seeing every day. Now, that's science. I think it's pretty obvious, but that's just the facts. Family Facts states that children whose mothers have low levels of sensitivity and leave them in daycare for more than 10 hours a week are more likely to experience attachment insecurity, which is associated with negative social behavioral outcomes, depression, social withdrawal, and anxiety, all the unfortunate side effects of a strained maternal relationship. Another study that took a look at 30 years of research evaluating the effects of non-maternal child care. They are big. Children who spend longer hours, 30 hours a week in daycare, are more likely to exhibit problematic social behaviors, including aggression, conflict, poor work habits, and risk-taking behaviors into adolescence. Although high-quality daycare has some positive effects, it does not reduce the negative effects associated with long hours in daycare. Mothers whose children spend long hours in daycare show a decrease in sensitivity in their interactions with their child during the child's early years, which are crucial years. There's an estimated 12 million American infants, toddlers, and preschoolers attending daycare. The majority spend up to 40 hours per week there. Many start when they are only weeks old.
So, I remember when I was little, I must have been very young, I don't remember how old, until I was 12 years old. I would go to daycare for 2 to 3 days a week. I mean, maybe sometimes it was as often as 4, but most of the time it was 2 to 3. I mean, so it wasn't full-time daycare, but it was enough to do exactly what he said daycare does to children in that video. It made me angry. As a child, I was angry at being left with strangers. Now, we would be at somebody's house. At one point, we actually did go to a daycare center. Actually, I went to another one too. So there was maybe 2 daycare centers in my early childhood. And, we would go there long enough for me to get used to it. So we go to some place for a year, or maybe a little bit more than a year before we move on to the next place for whatever reason. So, within that year, I'd get a chance to get used to it. But getting used to something and tolerating it isn't the same thing as loving it and feeling comfortable there, or feeling accepted or loved there, because that's what children need. They need love. They need nurturing, and at daycare centers and even at other people's houses, babysitters, even though they treat you nicely, perhaps, hopefully they do, you don't feel nurtured and loved as if you were their child. You're just a stranger in their home that they're being paid to take care of. And even as a child, I understood that. I knew that I was just in that person's home because they were being paid to take care of me. They weren't my mom. They didn't really love me like my mom. I was just there, and I felt like a stranger. Anyway, so going back to feeling angry, I can totally relate to what he said there. As a child, I could not express why I was angry. I just knew that I was. And I look at children and I think, you know what a hard time children have? They feel things, but they don't know how to express them. And even if they do try to express them, the adults in their lives don't listen to them. They just push them aside like, oh, we know what's better for you. You just need to get through it. And I don't really think that they're considering the turmoil that's happening inside of their children. And I really don't believe that they're considering that they are going against the Bible. So I was angry. I remember at one point I told my parents straight out, I hate going to that daycare. And it wasn't just that daycare. It was I hated going to the babysitter. I hated going to the daycare. I hated it. And I used that word, hate. You know, as adults, we have feelings and we want people to listen to us and to legitimize and to validate our emotions. You know, but as children, sometimes we don't have that person in our lives that will legitimize those emotions. We just get brushed aside as children. And I don't see how, scientifically, how this is helping our children, putting our children in daycare, but also biblically, how is this the right thing? You know, God tells mothers to be at home, love their children, to love their husbands, to manage the home, to bear children. Also, God tells us to not bring our children to the point to where they are overly discouraged or wrathful. In other words, angry. We're not supposed to bring our children to that point by our actions and by our words that they become angry, they become wrathful. We're supposed to have a nurturing spirit towards our children. And I think mothers, when they go off to work, what they do is they ignore the mothering heart that God has given them, the nurturing heart. That feeling of guilt that they have at leaving their baby or their children in daycare, that feeling of guilt is something that they push away and they ignore. And they say, you know what, I do feel guilty, but I'm going to ignore it because it isn't, how should I put this? It's something that they don't see as legitimate. They don't see it as a legitimate feeling of guilt. It's just their feelings playing with them. But in their minds, they have to overcome their feelings and go to work and get things done. And no matter if they feel guilty, no matter if their children don't like it, they just have to get through it. And they're not considering the long-term harm that it can do to their children, to them, to their relationship. And God tells us that we should, as mothers, we should be at home. We should look well to the ways of our household. We should, like I said before, we should love our children, love our husbands, and be keepers at home, as God says for us to do. When we disobey God and we make up excuses and justifications for why it's okay to go out and work and put our kids in daycare or at the babysitter, we are opening up the door to a lot of problems. And I know that that was true for me as a child. I still remember it very poignantly today. I'm 34 years old, and I can still remember how I felt at 4. As an adult, I understand that sometimes mothers, under extreme situations, may be forced to go to work if their family or their church aren't willing to help them. Let's say a husband dies. You know, you don't have any control over that. Or your husband leaves you. You know, you don't have control over that, and you as a woman might be forced to have to do something. I mean, ideally, your family and your church family would help you so that you wouldn't have to go out to get a job, so that you could stay at home with your children, because that's where they need you. But realistically, how often does that happen? Oftentimes the woman has to go to work. And in those cases, I understand how she would just have to, you know, just push through. But there are other circumstances where I see women working where, you know, they probably don't really need to be. You know, if they had a smaller house, if they got rid of that extra car, if they got rid of some of these payments on things that they're, paying for. Whatever it is, they can get rid of things and they can just try to make it work out. Those are a few thoughts that I had on that video. I totally agree with Wretched's viewpoint. I'll link to it in the description box below so that you can see it for yourself. He references, like I said, a few studies, so those would be worth looking into. That's part of that is the reason why I've chosen to stay at home with my children. Number one, because the Bible says to. And let's not make justifications. Let's not, for our behavior, let's not try to excuse ourselves and say, well, it doesn't really say what it says. No, it says what it says, and we just need to live by that, right? So that's the number one reason why I stay at home with my kids. And the number two reason I stay at home with them is because I remember how I felt as a child, going to daycare, going to the babysitter, and how much I hated it. And I don't want to put my children through that same thing if I don't have to. But, we're all human. And I also want to make sure that you understand that that I know how important it is to have mercy on people, because people are human, and they're not always going to treat us the way that we deserve to be treated and we want to be treated. So we have to have mercy on them and be forgiving towards them. And God's a big God, and even after all that we go through, and me going to daycare, I mean, for some of you out there, you're thinking that's not even a big deal. I mean, have you probably not even been through what I've been through, something even worse. And yeah, I get that. But, it is true. We have to have mercy towards people, forgiveness and patience with them, because, we're not perfect either. So I just want to make sure that you know that I know that. And that's it. So I hope this video has helped you kind of, maybe see things from a new viewpoint, or if you already believe that way, it'll just kind of solidify that for you. See you next time. I'm Jessica from Truth at Home. Bye.